to the CGIAR Periscope Live interview series from GCARD3, the third global conference on agricultural research for development, which is happening this week in Johannesburg, South Africa. My name's Sarah Quinn, and I'm the communication specialist for the International Potato Centre based in Nairobi, Kenya. And I'm joined here tonight by Graham Thiele, who is the director for the CGIAR Research Program on roots, tubers and bananas. So Graham, thank you so much for joining us today and for participating in the interview. To get things started, can I just get you to introduce the research program on roots, tubers and bananas and tell us a little bit about the work that you do in Africa and the rest of the world?
Okay, so this is a program that's been running 4 or 5 years, and we work across the whole range of roots, tubers and bananas. So we're working also with potatoes, sweet potatoes, cassava, and all of these crops have common that they use living planting materials. So if you work with cereals, they're tiny little seeds that you plant. In the case of our crops, you have to use cuttings or some other ways. So all have got quite a lot in common, and they have a lot in common in terms of how they're consumed. So they're different from cereals in that they're quite bulky and perishable. So there's a lot of similarities between the different crops in terms of both the way farmers handle them and the challenges for research. This is a program that brings together a group of CGIAR research centers, including the Potato Center, with other partners and with over 200 other research for development partners. So it's really a large-scale, if you like, stakeholder platform that brings people together to do collaboration on research for development around these crops to translate research into tangible outcomes for people living and who've got nutritional deficiencies or low incomes all around the developing world. So it's a global platform for bringing people together around some of the pressing problems these people face.
Thank you.
Maybe that was too far.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you. It sounds like a very exciting area to be working in. So as a follow-up to that, can you share with us your thoughts on what you see as a promising agricultural innovation that RTB is working on?
Yeah, okay, so a couple of innovations. We've noticed in West Africa in particular, and other parts of the world too, that there's a very large amount of cassava processing goes on. But what typically happens, you have small-scale processes, they peel the cassava, and there's very large amounts of waste. Now, often that waste is left by the side of the road, by the side of the processing facility, and it becomes an environmental hazard. You can see large piles of the cassava peels. So what we've seen is there's a big opportunity to translate what's environmentally damaging into a source of value added. So we've teamed up with the people at the Livestock Center and worked on a way to using local equipment to transform that waste product into a usable feed for animals. And we've linked up with feed factories who are currently doing trials to look at the use of that in a real life context. And we've already got some really encouraging results that the cassava peel transformed into an animal feed can be a very promising source of nutrition for animals. That's one example. We have another very interesting example in East Africa around sweet potato, where we've linked up the provision of sweet potato as a very nutritious, orange sweet potato as a very nutritious crop, to women who are attending maternity clinics. And women go to the clinics and they receive a voucher, and then they can use that voucher to get hold of sweet potato cuttings, and then they're with their partners, they plant out those cuttings and they can produce orange flesh sweet potato. And orange flesh sweet potato has an extremely high vitamin A content. So through the seed system, the system of vouchers, we've been able to bring together the agricultural sector and the health and nutrition sector for women to, if you like, to be able to grow their own vitamin A pills. So that's a complex innovation that brings together two different sectors and revolves around our research into orange flesh sweet potato. So two quite contrasting cases there of promising innovations.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Can you also share with us an example that you think demonstrates lasting impact from the RTB program?
Yes, okay, I've got a very good example, changing crops. So we're going now to the Andes and potatoes. So we realized about 10 or 15 years ago that many farmers at higher altitudes in the Andes grow native potatoes. These are extremely diverse in terms of colors and shapes, but they weren't really appreciated. And what we realized is this is potentially can be converted into a much higher value crop, that farmers can sell those native potatoes in a transformed way and add value to their sales. So we teamed up with processing companies and NGOs, and we're able to develop a whole array of innovations around those native potatoes, entering into top-class restaurants in Lima, into developing potato chips or crisps using those native potato varieties. And when you make chips from the native potato varieties, you get amazing colors and shapes. So they were actually very interesting. And you can now find those potato chips or crisps on the shelves of the supermarkets in Lima. So we've been able to generate revenue, income from people who are well off, and have that revenue flow back to people at high altitudes who are growing those potatoes who've got better off. Now, because that entered into value chains and it stimulated commercial innovation, it's private companies that are doing that. So we have sustainability because it's gone into markets. And we've been able to negotiate corporate social responsibility agreements so that additional funds flow back from the companies to the smallholder farmers at altitude. So that's increased the well-being of those farmers, and sustainability is built in because it's become a commercial proposition.
Yeah, very nice example of the private sector working with public sector. It's great. I think something that's being discussed at GCARD this week is around demonstrating impact of our work. What do you think we can do to further demonstrate impact that might help to increase investment in agricultural research for development?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we need a sort of a diverse approach. It's really good to have stories of particular people who've benefited in different ways from agricultural research, but also increasingly the donors want quantified evidence that things made a difference. So it means we have to invest into doing impact studies to show actually what's been adopted, who's adopted it, and to get some more quantified estimates of what those changes are. And there's some novel approaches we can use to understanding what changed. One thing we've been very interested in is what's called social network analysis. You can actually map out the networks of who's adopting a technology and see how people are in contact. So we'd really much like to explore novel ways, perhaps using crowdsourcing or other information technologies to map out who's been adopting and get users themselves or partners themselves in documenting impact, but do that at scale. So we don't just get one or two cases, but if we can apply crowdsourcing and some other new smart technologies to better mapping out adoption, then that's going to be an incredibly powerful tool to persuade the donors that actually our research does make a difference. And that would very nicely complement the sort of case stories that provide particular cases of women or men farmers that maybe grew more bananas or had a better potato variety and got some more. So we need to combine the two, the hard evidence with the soft stories of people whose lives have been affected or improved by those technologies and innovations.
Yeah, fantastic. Can you tell us a bit about what you see as the key priorities or areas for research for RTB in Africa that you think will help us maintain focus on future impact?
Yeah, that's another very good question. So one of the challenges for root and tuber crops is that there's going to be a massive growth of populations in Africa over the next 20, 30, 40 years. There's going to be, populations in the central part of Africa are probably going to certainly at least double. So we need to be providing more food and better food to people living in those cities. Now if we move all the way through from West Africa to East Africa through that central belt, root, tuber and banana crops are incredibly important to people's livelihoods. But what we have to do as populations grow, going to be more people living within cities, so we have to reconfigure value chains to lower waste and to make those root, tubers and bananas available to people living in cities in a more convenient way. And we need to make sure that those foods are available in a more nutritious way. We're moving now in many parts of Africa from a burden of undernutrition to overnutrition, so we also need to pay a lot of attention to the ways in which our roots, tubers and bananas are being consumed, so they're being consumed in healthier ways, and as products move from the farm through to markets, through to people's tables, that those foods are highly nutritious. And there's huge scope within the RTB sets of crops to improve those nutritional characteristics. But the challenge is to do it at scale and to do it by engaging with value chains, and that means doing research not just on the varieties but on the different ways in which we're engaging with those value chains, in which products are delivered, how supply chains functioned, how information around our products is communicated amongst the different values. So it's a new area of research that's opening up for agricultural research, which we need to do to ensure that our more traditional work on varieties and other technologies remains relevant to the bigger challenges going forward.
Sounds like exciting times ahead for RTB. Maybe just to bring it back to GCARD3, can you give us perhaps a highlight from the week thus far, or some ideas of what you're hoping to get out of the week?
Yeah, so I'm actually sitting in one of the themes around, it's around documenting impact, going back to that topic of impact. And what's fabulous about GCARD, or the GCARD meetings, GCARD3, is the diversity of people that we have around the table. So one of the things that kind of a little bit caught our attention was intergenerational exchange, that you have some very young people who have huge enthusiasm. We saw some wonderful presentations, the first day actually by some very young people who are explaining how we need to get youth back into the picture. But within our group we realized also that the older people, the elders if you like, of our community also have a lot to bring to the table. So we're talking about some work with Award, which is a group that supports women professionals, and there have been some experiences I think 10 or 15 years ago drawing attention to the fact that individual programs or individual training needs to be complemented by a more organizational approach, and this work had been forgotten. But one of the ladies in the group, in the more senior generation like me, remembered this and brought it up, but the person hadn't remembered. So there's lots of knowledge in the senior generation that we need to tap into. So I think one of the interesting things here is this exchange between the generations, that the younger generation that we've seen come through very strongly here has a huge amount to offer, but we also need to not forget the elder generation that's also got their perspectives and their memories. So I think one of the things that's great about GCARD is having such a diverse set of people and these opportunities to exchange and build new knowledge for collective action.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and insights tonight, Graham. Yeah, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week at GCARD3. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It was a pleasure to talk to you.